What would you do if you saw an elderly couple publicly humiliated over a $15 meal they couldn't afford? Have you ever been in a restaurant when something uncomfortable happened at another table? That awkward moment when you want to look away but can't help watching? Well, what happened in a small neighborhood diner on one chilly afternoon will restore your faith in humanity and prove that heroes come in the most unexpected packages. This is the story of 12-year-old Tarek Owens, whose single act of kindness didn't just pay for a meal. It transformed an entire community and reminded everyone present that sometimes the smallest hands carry the biggest hearts. If stories like this inspire you to believe in the power of human goodness, hit that like button right now, because you're about to witness something truly extraordinary. Picture this, a modest neighborhood diner where conversations flow as freely as a coffee, where regulars know each other's orders, and where the worn vinyl booths have absorbed decades of laughter, tears, and life stories. It was here that Tarek Owen sat in his favorite corner booth, carefully counting coins that represented weeks of hard work. Tarek wasn't your typical 12-year-old. While other kids his age were asking parents for money, Tarek had spent his afternoons mowing lawns and raking leaves, earning every single coin that now lay scattered across the scratch-form mica table. His mother, a woman who worked 2 jobs to keep their small apartment warm and their bellies full, had taught him something profound. Kindness costs nothing, but it returns tenfold. Those weren't just pretty words hanging on their refrigerator. They were the foundation of how Tarek saw the world. His mother had shown him that wealth isn't measured in bank accounts, but in the willingness to share what little you have. The coins before him represented something special. Enough for a burger, fries, and maybe even a slice of pie. For most kids, this would be routine. For Tarek, it was a celebration. He had earned this moment through sweat, determination, and the kind of work ethic that would make most adults proud. As he organized his quarters, dimes, and nickels into neat piles, Tarek felt that warm satisfaction that comes from achieving something on your own. His mother would be proud. She always said that money earned through honest work tastes better than money handed to you. But Tarek had no idea that his next decision would change not just his life, but ripple through an entire community like stones thrown into still water. The diner hummed with its usual afternoon rhythm when the elderly couple entered. They moved slowly. The man's weathered hand gently guided his wife to a table near the window. There was something dignified about them, the way she smoothed her coat before sitting, the way he pulled out her chair despite his trembling hands. They ordered modestly. A cup of soup to share, a grilled cheese sandwich cut in half, 2 cups of coffee. Simple food for what should have been a simple afternoon. But nothing about what happened next was simple. When their meal arrived, they ate quietly, occasionally sharing gentle words that spoke of decades together. The man's hand shook slightly as he lifted a spoon, not from nervousness, but from the kind of tremor that time brings to even the strongest hands. His wife watched him with eyes full of love and patience, occasionally helping steady his cup. They were the kind of couple that made you believe in forever. When the server brought their check, the man reached for his wallet with the automatic confidence of someone who had been paying restaurant bills for 70 years. But as his fingers searched his coat pockets, then his pants pockets, then searched again, something shifted in his expression. His wife noticed immediately. "Harold?" she whispered, her voice carrying the flutter of concern. I can't find." Harold's voice trailed off as the reality hit him. His wallet was gone. Lost, stolen, or simply forgotten at home. It didn't matter. What mattered was that they couldn't pay for the meal they had already eaten. The server, a young woman who had been working double shifts to pay for nursing school, found herself in an impossible position. She liked this couple. They reminded her of her own grandparents. But she also knew her manager's strict policy about unpaid bills. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I have to get my manager." The diner, which moments before had buzzed with comfortable conversation, began to quiet as other patrons sensed something was wrong. Conversations died mid-sentence. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Everyone could feel the tension building like pressure before a storm. The manager emerged from the kitchen, his expression already set in stone before he reached their table. He was a man shaped by years of running a small business on thin margins, where every unpaid check came out his own pocket. "Folks, "I'm sorry, but you can't leave without paying," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had dealt with this situation before. "It's $15.37. Comment below if you've ever witnessed a moment like this, when dignity collides with circumstances, and everyone around it becomes an unwilling audience to someone else's most vulnerable moment. Harold's hand shook more violently now, not from age, but from embarrassment. "Sir, I understand completely. My wallet, I seem to have lost it. But if you could just give us a moment to call our son." "I'm sorry, but that's not how this works," the manager replied, his voice softening slightly but his position unchanged. "I have a business to run." The elderly woman reached across the table and took her husband's trembling hand. "It's okay, Harold," she whispered, but her own voice carried the weight of profound embarrassment. They were good people caught in an impossible moment, their dignity hanging by the thinnest thread. The entire diner had fallen silent. 43 people sat frozen, watching this private humiliation unfold in public. Some stared at their plates. Others pretended to check their phones. A few watched with the uncomfortable fascination of people witnessing an accident. Everyone felt it. Everyone knew what was happening. But no one knew what to do. That's when something extraordinary happened. In that moment of collective silence, when the weight of awkwardness pressed down on everyone present, a 12-year-old boy made a choice that would echo through time. Tarek had been watching from his corner booth, his coins still scattered across the table like a treasure map of hard work. He heard his mother's voice as clearly as if she were sitting beside him. "Kindness costs nothing, but it returns tenfold." The burger he had planned to order suddenly seemed less important than the dignity of two strangers who reminded him of the grandparents he had never met. Without hesitation, Tarek slid out of his booth. Every eye in the diner watched as this young boy, barely tall enough to see over the counter, walked steadily toward the register. His sneakers squeaked against the linoleum floor, the only sound in the absolute silence. He reached into his pockets and pulled out his carefully saved coins. Quarters earned from Mrs. Johnson's lawn, dimes from raking the Thompsons' leaves, nickels from helping Mr. Chin clean his garage. "Excuse me," Tarek said to the manager, his voice clear and steady. "I'd like to pay for their meal." The words hung in the air like magic. The manager stared down at this child, confusion flickering across his face. "Son, do you understand what you're saying?" "Yes, sir," Tarek replied, beginning to count out his coins on the counter. $15.37, right? But what happened next proved that kindness truly is the most contagious force in the universe. The elderly couple's reaction was immediate and overwhelming. The woman's hand flew to her mouth as tears spilled down her cheeks. Harold's shoulders, which had been rigid with embarrassment, began to shake, not with tremor, but with emotion so pure it was almost painful to witness. "Oh, my dear boy," the woman whispered, rising from her chair despite her husband's protests. She walked over to Tarek with the careful steps of someone whose bones carried the wisdom of many years, and she wrapped in a hug that seemed to encompass all the gratitude in the world. "Thank you," she breathed into his ear. "Thank you for your kindness." Harold struggled to his feet, his own eyes glistening. With shaking hands, he pulled a small, worn piece of paper from his shirt pocket, something he had carried for years. On it, he wrote his address and phone number with handwriting that spoke of decades of signing important documents. "Please," he said, pressing the note into Tarek's palm, "please visit us any time. We would be honored to have you in our home." The transformation that swept through the diner was instantaneous and profound. The server who had been caught in an impossible position was now wiping tears from her eyes. The manager, whose expression had been carved from stone, was staring at Tarek with something approaching awe, but it was the other customers who provided the real magic. One by one, they began to respond to what they had witnessed. An older woman at the counter quietly asked the server to add an extra $20 to her own bill for the next person who might need it. A businessman in a wrinkled suit did the same. Then another. The cash register became a shrine to unexpected generosity, as person after person contributed to what would become a fund for anyone who found themselves in need of a meal and short of money. If this story is touching your heart and reminding you of the power we all have to make a difference, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell. Because stories like Tarek's prove that heroes walk among us every single day. The immediate impact of Tarek's gesture was powerful, but what happened in the days and weeks that followed proved that single act of kindness can indeed change the world. The elderly couple, Harold and Martha Peterson, went home that evening and shared their story with their daughter. She, moved by the kindness of a stranger, posted about Tarek's generosity on social media, not to seek attention, but to celebrate the goodness she had witnessed. The post went viral in a way that only genuine human stories can, not because of clever marketing or shocking content, but because it reminded people of something they desperately wanted to believe, that kindness still exists, that goodness still matters, that there are still people willing to sacrifice for strangers. Within days, the neighborhood diner became an unexpected pilgrimage site. People came not just for the food, but to eat in the place where they had heard something beautiful had happened. The Tarek Fund, as it became known, grew beyond anyone's expectations. Strangers donated money specifically to cover meals for anyone who found themselves unable to pay. The manager, whose stern policy had seemed so reasonable before, found himself managing something unprecedented. His small diner had become a symbol of community compassion, a place where people came to remember what was possible when we choose kindness over indifference. Local news stations picked up the story, then regional outlets. Soon, people from 3 states away were making special trips to eat at the diner, where a 12-year-old boy had reminded an entire room of adults what really mattered. But the most profound changes were happening in the lives of the people who had been there that day. The server used her experience with Tarek as inspiration in her nursing school applications, writing about how he had shown her that healing doesn't always happen in hospitals. Sometimes it happens at a lunch counter when someone chooses compassion over comfort. The businessman who had added to the fund found himself volunteering at a local soup kitchen. The elderly woman who had been the first to contribute began regularly buying extra meals for homeless individuals she encountered. And Harold and Martha Peterson? They didn't just write their phone number on that piece of paper as a polite gesture. They meant it. When Tarek visited them the following weekend, they welcomed him like family. Harold, who had been a successful businessman before retirement, learned about Tarek's academic ambitions. Martha, a retired teacher, noticed his love of reading. Together, they began a mentorship that would last for years. They helped him apply for academic scholarships when the time came. They attended his high school graduation. They celebrated his college acceptance. They became the grandparents he had never had, and he became the grandson they had always wanted. The ripple effect of that single moment continued to expand in ways that no one could predict it. The story of Tarek's kindness spread through the community like seeds on fertile ground, sprouting into countless other acts of generosity. Teachers began sharing the story with their students, using it to illustrate lessons about character and community. Parents used it to teach their children about the power of small sacrifices. Religious leaders referenced it in sermons about loving your neighbor. The local schools established a Tarek Award for students who demonstrated exceptional kindness to others. The city council proclaimed an annual Random Act of Kindness Day in honor of what had happened at the diner. But perhaps most importantly, the story changed how people in that community looked at each other. In grocery store checkout lines, people began paying attention to the struggles of others. In restaurants, diners started noticing when someone seemed unable to afford their meal. In neighborhoods, residents began checking on elderly neighbors more regularly. The simple question, "What would Tarek do?" became a shorthand for choosing compassion over convenience, generosity over self-interest, courage over comfort. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it today, because the world needs more people like Tarek. People who understand that we all have the power to transform someone's worst moment into something beautiful. The long-term consequences of that afternoon at the diner extended far beyond anyone's imagination. As Tarek grew older, the lessons from that day continued to shape his character and his choices. In high school, he started a peer mentoring program for students struggling academically or financially. In college, he majored in social work, inspired by the memory of how one small act had created such widespread positive change. After graduation, he returned to his hometown and opened a nonprofit organization focused on connecting young people with elderly community members who needed assistance. The Petersons remained actively involved in his life, becoming not just mentors but genuine family. Harold taught him about business and financial responsibility. Martha helped him develop his writing skills and encourage his love of learning. Together, they showed him that families aren't always born. Sometimes they're chosen. Sometimes they're created through moments of unexpected kindness. The diner itself underwent its own transformation. The manager, whose name was actually Robert Chen, eventually bought the restaurant from its previous owner. He renamed it the Kindness Cafe and made the Targ Fund a permanent fixture. On the wall where Targ had counted his coins, Robert hung a simple plaque: "Kindness costs nothing, but returns tenfold." The booth where Targ had sat became known as the Generosity Table, and people would often request to sit there, hoping to capture some of the magic that had happened on that remarkable afternoon. But the most profound lesson from Targ's story isn't about dramatic gestures or life-changing moments. It's about the extraordinary power of ordinary kindness. Targ wasn't wealthy. He wasn't famous. He wasn't particularly powerful or influential. He was simply a 12-year-old boy who had been taught that kindness matters, and who had the courage to act on that teaching when it would have been easier to look away. His story reminds us that we all have opportunities to be heroes in small ways every single day. The homeless person asking for spare change, the elderly neighbor struggling with heavy groceries, the classmate eating lunch alone, the co-worker having a difficult day. We might not always have coins to spare like Targ did, but we always have something to give: a smile, a helping hand, a listening ear, a moment of genuine attention in a world that often feels hurried and disconnected. The universality of Targ's story lies not in its uniqueness, but in its accessibility. Every single person reading this has the power to be someone's Targ. Every day presents us with choices between self-interest and service, between comfort and compassion, between looking away and stepping forward. Age doesn't determine our capacity for wisdom. Economic status doesn't determine our ability to be generous. Social position doesn't determine our power to make a difference. Sometimes the smallest hands do carry the biggest hearts. Sometimes the youngest voices speak the most profound truths. Sometimes the most humble gestures create the most lasting change. The story of Targ Owens reminds us that heroism isn't about grand gestures or dramatic rescues. It's about seeing need and responding with whatever we have to give. It's about choosing empathy over indifference, even when it costs us something we value. Most importantly, Targ's story proves that kindness is never wasted. Even when we can't see the immediate results, even when no one notices, even when it feels like a small drop in an ocean of need, kindness matters. Kindness spreads. Kindness changes things. Every day, you have the power to be someone's Targ. Every interaction is an opportunity to choose compassion. Every moment presents a possibility of creating ripple effects that extend far beyond what you can see or imagine. The question isn't whether you have enough to make a difference. The question is whether you're willing to give what you have, even when it means sacrificing something you want for yourself. If this story has inspired you to look for opportunities to practice unexpected kindness, hit that like button. If it's reminded you that heroes come in all ages and from all backgrounds, make sure to subscribe for more stories that celebrate the power of human goodness. And if you've been moved to think about your own opportunities to be someone's unexpected blessing, share your thoughts in the comments below. Because at the end of the day, we all have the choice that Targ faced in that diner. We can count our coins and think only of ourselves, or we can look around, see need, and choose to act with generosity. We can be bystanders to other people's struggles, or we can be the hands and hearts that remind them they're not alone in this world. The story of Targ Owens teaches us that sometimes all it takes is one 12-year-old with a heart bigger than his wallet to remind us who we're meant to be and who we still have the power to become. Because kindness costs nothing, but it truly does return tenfold. Not just to those who receive it, but to those who choose to give it, and to everyone who witnesses its power to transform the ordinary moments of life into something extraordinary.